Hello, and welcome back to Civilization Education. Last time, we left off with Polemarchus confused, along with us, and perhaps a little frustrated with Socrates. In this episode, I will finish this exchange with Polemarchus and begin with Thrasymachus. With Polemarchus saying he no longer knows what he means, but still affirming justice is helping friends and hurting enemies, Socrates tries to understand his position by asking what friends and enemies are, if they are what one believes to be good or likewise believes to be bad. Polemarchus agrees that this is so. In response, Socrates asks if people make mistakes in this distinction, that we can think people are good when they are not, and same of the bad. We, like the subject, acknowledge this is the case. It happens all the time. Constantly we have people coming in and out of our lives that we either recognize in the moment or in retrospect were doing the opposite of what we thought good or bad. So, says Socrates, the good are enemies and the bad friends. Certainly, replies Polemarchus. Yet the good are just and such as not to do injustice. It looks like it. And then, after all, is it just to treat badly men who have done nothing unjust? We are again left confounded, like Polemarchus, as to how this follows. To recap, our friends are those we perceive to be good, regardless if they do or don't actually do so. Same for our enemies. And to be just is to help our friends and hurt our enemies. Socrates makes their actions matter and suggests that friends can do bad and enemies good. So then, justice must be to help our friends who are bad and harm our enemies who do good, or as it was put, nothing unjust. Polemarchus rejects this idea in favor of Socrates' suggestion that the just harm the unjust and help the just. With this new idea, it is postulated that for all who make mistakes, that being everyone, it is just to harm friends, for they do bad, and just to help enemies, for they do good. And now we have arrived at the opposite of what Simonides and Polemarchus meant. With this, Polemarchus suggests that he didn't define friend and enemy correctly, putting forward that the man who seems to be and is good is a friend, while the man who seems good and is not, though they seem to be, are not a friend. Same goes for enemy. Now, actions and not just perception are a factor here. This can make many people uncomfortable if this view of justice is correct. That means to be just, one must enforce the just standards on those they consider friends when they do wrong, and vice versa for the enemy. Many like to think they behave this way, just like many like to think they are good people just because they haven't killed anyone. But just as their view of themselves collapses when faced with the wrongs they've done, same goes for how they treat their friends and enemies. After this defining of terms, Socrates asks if a just man can harm any person at all. Polemarchus confirms as such that a just man harms enemies. As we've seen thus far, Socrates then tries to apply said standard to other circumstances and asks if a harmed horse becomes better or worse. Worse, of course. In respect of being a dog or a horse. Again, a horse, of course. Then what of a dog? Harmed, better or worse? In respect of being a horse or a dog? This leads necessarily to the question, if a person is harmed, do they become worse in respect to human virtue? The answer we instinctively understand is no. On this, we should immediately recognize there is a flaw in the argument being presented. However, Polemarchus agrees with the conclusion. Why does he agree and we do not? Discuss in the comments. Isn't it justice human virtue? Asks Socrates. That's also necessary, retorts Polemarchus. Then, my friend, human beings who have been harmed necessarily become more unjust. This should further highlight the discrepancy I pointed out earlier. Either naive or just enamored with Socrates, Polemarchus continues to grant the premise. Well, are musicians able to make men unmusical by music? Are men skilled in horsemanship unable to make men incompetent riders by horsemanship? The answer to both of these being no, the question arises, are just men able to make others unjust by justice, or are good men able to make others bad by virtue of being good? Again, no. Socrates, to hammer his point home, continues, cooling is not the work of heat, but the opposite, nor wetting the work of dryness, but the opposite, nor harming the work of the good, but the opposite, and it's the just man who is good. Once Polemarchus agrees to these, Socrates finishes with, then it is not the work of the just man to harm either friend or anyone else, Polemarchus, but his opposite, the unjust man. I agree, says Polemarchus. Then if someone asserts that it's just to give what is owed to each man, and he understands by this that harm is owed to enemies and the just man and help to friends. And the man who said it was not wise, for he wasn't telling the truth, for it has become apparent to us that it is never just to harm anyone. If you're curious as to how such a conclusion can be reached and where exactly we went off the rails, I don't blame you. The answer, of course, is what it normally is, not defining and agreeing on presuppositions. Here it is the word harm. According to Alan Bloom, who wrote the translation I'm using, to Socrates, quote, to harm is to make a person or thing worse, with respect to his or its specific virtue. Justice, he asserts without proof, is human virtue, so to harm someone would be to make him more unjust, end quote. This paired with his alteration to what he was saying earlier about the arts, which is they are dedicated to goals rather than being neutral, and the conclusion that a just man cannot do justice by making another man unjust, therefore cannot harm him, follows. What Polemarchus means by harm, however, is the removal of the good, that being life or property. How Bloom draws this conclusion I do not know, as Polemarchus has not had the same opportunity to make such assertions as Socrates. Bloom could be taking this position as 1, a natural conclusion based on what Polemarchus has said so far regarding friends and enemies and how that reflects a nation or state. 2, it is contrary to Socrates, or 3, it is what we most often think of when it comes to harming enemies. Regardless, the fact that Socrates and Polemarchus are at this impasse is clear. At the end of this discussion, Socrates suggests to Polemarchus to stop quoting and drawing his ideas from others and to match wits with him 1-to-1. Personally, I find this funny because I believe that this worldview is nothing new. It may be new to Socrates, meaning Plato, but on the whole, it is not new. This cannot be strictly proven, as there are no older writings that I'm aware of espousing similar thoughts, but given we're all people of the same nature across time, he necessarily can't be the first, just as Marx wasn't the first either. As Polemarchus agrees, and Socrates tries to restart the conversation by saying, since it has become apparent the neither justice or the just is this, what else would one say they are? A man by the name of Thrasymachus jumps in. What is this nonsense that has possessed you for so long, Socrates, and why do you act like fools making way for one another? If you truly want to know what the just is, don't only ask and gratify your love of honor by refuting whatever someone answers. You know that it is easier to ask than to answer, but answer for yourself and say what you assert the just to be. And see to it you don't tell me that it is the needful or the helpful or the profitable or the gainful or the advantageous, but tell me clearly and precisely what you mean, and I won't accept it if you say such inanities. Finally, someone sticks it to Socrates, tells him to back up his high-minded buffoonery or to just shut up. Sadly, however, Thrasymachus is not the hero of this story. For the next little bit, all that happens is Socrates plays the ego of Thrasymachus, calling him blessed, wise, and best of men. All this to avoid giving his own definition of justice. Now, certainly Thrasymachus is correct in saying that it is easier to repart what others say than to defend one's own position, and I'll admit that Socrates is wise for not giving in to a hostile party. Despite this, I side with Thrasymachus, only in calling out the behavior of Socrates because they were not engaged in a true dialogue. It was only a dialogue in only the way a parent asks leading questions to a child, or a teacher to a student. This is never an equal discussion in order to find the truth. Socrates believes he already has the truth and is going to put all other parties down first, rather rhetorically dishonest, might I say, until he is left alone with none to challenge him. As I said, Thrasymachus is not the hero here. He has his own issues. First of all, he backs himself into a corner by saying that whatever Socrates says justice is, it cannot be the needful, helpful, profitable, gainful, or advantageous. This prevents Socrates from doing the very thing Thrasymachus wants. Secondly, he lets Socrates goad him into defining justice instead of Socrates. Thirdly, he is hung up on the idea that he should be paid for beating Socrates. This, along with my second point, shows that Thrasymachus is a haughty man, and that is his downfall. After Thrasymachus gets baited by Socrates, he gives his definition. The just is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. Socrates then tries to understand its meaning, saying, if Polemarchus, the pancratist, is stronger than we are, and beef is advantageous for his body, then this food is also advantageous and just for us who are weaker than he is. I feel this effort at understanding is disingenuous, and Thrasymachus agrees, calling Socrates, quote, disgusting. To support my claim, Socrates continues to ironically mock him, saying to Thrasymachus, he is the best of men once again. Thrasymachus elaborates, essentially saying that each state or nation has a ruling class. They are the stronger and pass laws that are to their advantage, and they assert that the laws that are set are just and are to be followed by the weaker. Any man who breaks the laws must be necessarily labeled as unjust. This is how Thrasymachus establishes the universality that Polemarchus was struggling with. As he finishes explaining what it is he meant, he also calls Socrates the best of men, flinging some barbs back in his direction. Remember, this whole work is understood to be a fiction, so either Plato really didn't like Thrasymachus, or Socrates in his life didn't, and Plato is displaying that here. Either way, there's some bad blood here, and it was mutual. Socrates points out that to Thrasymachus, justice is the advantageous, though he was forbade from using that. I think this is some good narrative flair to show that either Thrasymachus didn't want Socrates to say what he would, or that in his distaste for Socrates, he easily makes errors. Regardless, Socrates begins to consider the position of Thrasymachus and pick it apart. Now tell me, don't you say that it's also just to obey the rulers? I do, replied Thrasymachus. Are the rulers in their several cities infallible, or are they such as to make mistake too? By all means, they certainly are such to make mistakes too. When they put their hands to setting down laws, do they set some down correctly and some incorrectly? I suppose so. Is that law correct which sets down what is advantageous for themselves, and the one incorrect which sets down what is disadvantageous? Or how do you mean it? As you said. But whatever the ruler set down must be done by those who are ruled, and this is the just, of course. Then according to your argument, it is just to do not only what is advantageous for the stronger, but also the opposite, what is disadvantageous. This is the second definition of justice that has fallen due to human fallibility. Does this mean that true justice cannot be carried out by humans? Is there a way to carry it out that accounts for our error? Is there something outside of us that can provide true justice? Meditate on these questions and discuss them in the comments. Until next time.